In the middle of the night, I was woken up by an unexpected ringing. The sound made me jump up in bed. Who could possibly be calling at midnight? I brought my phone to my ear, then heard a familiar voice begin to speak. With a frustrated tone, my aunt had informed me that my mom's latest caretaker had quit. My mother has been severely ill for many years, yet all of our caretakers have been unable to stay for more than 6 months. I knew that this time, I had to take responsibility. Until I could find someone who could actually handle my mother, I'd take care of her myself. The drive into my hometown was quiet. Now that I was an adult, the town I'd grown up in seemed so different than before. Within the small city, there were tons of petroleum plants, polluting the air into a foggy gray. The darker the roads got, the closer I was to my destination. Once I was in front of my childhood home, I stepped out of my car. My hand wrapped around the cold doorknob, but before I could even fully open it, I was greeted by the face of my mother. Her face was void of the grace I was familiar with. The expression on her features was just empty, with a smile that seemed to have nothing behind it.
Hello, dear. It's been a long time.
My body stood in the doorway. She leaned forward to hug me without hesitation. My mother always used to hesitate. I found myself looking in the mirror behind her. My reflection resembled my mother so much, yet not at all. After our greetings, she led me into the dining room for dinner. Immediately, upon stepping into the kitchen, the stench of something burning filled my lungs. I ran over to the oven and pulled it open. The familiar smell of my mother's infamous meatloaf was overpowered by the smoke that flooded out of the oven. I pulled out the tray with gloves and realized there were multiple doll heads melted into it. It seemed like my mother's sickness was worse than I thought. Despite her frantic protest, I threw the meatloaf out in order to take out instead. Dinner was silent that night. Only the sounds of the silverware scraping across the plates could be heard. After washing the dishes, I laid in my childhood twin-sized bed to rest. My mother's footsteps were so quiet, I almost didn't hear her step into my room. If it weren't for the door creaking, I wouldn't have known at all. She stood there, watching me pretend to sleep for what seemed like an eternity. After I heard the door creak closed again, I sat up in my bed. I stepped out from beneath the covers to go check on her before I spotted something in the corner of the room. My mother stood there silently, completely engulfed in darkness. The sight almost made me jump out of my skin. I began to approach her, then realized she was asleep. Had she been sleepwalking this whole time? I carefully led her to my bed and pulled the blanket over her. I stayed up for the rest of the night, with her eyes never closing. Then, she finally jolted awake as the sun rose. My mother was surprised to be laying in my bed, like she didn't have a clue about what happened last night. Throughout the rest of the day, I kept her in the corner of my eye. However, she asked me if I could go outside to trim the bushes, since her hands were too shaky to handle yard work. I was hesitant to leave her alone in the house, but the previous caretakers had definitely not taken care of it. I found myself busy with trimming the grass, plucking the weeds, and washing the sides of the house until sunset. Once I stepped back into the house, it was completely silent. I called out for my mom, but my voice only echoed back to me. As I wandered down the hallways of my childhood home, I found myself in front of my mom's old sewing room. As a kid, I spent most of my days there. I'd be on the floor coloring as she sewed new outfits for me. I stepped inside, and the stench of something awful filled my lungs. On her sewing table laid a unique material I'd never seen before. I ran my fingertips over it. It felt a little like leather, but it had a strange, peachy tint to it. That's when I heard the faint sound of the shower running. However, it didn't make me feel reassured. My mother always had trouble with slipping in the bath. I walked upstairs to her bathroom door. The door was already open slightly. Just as I was about to knock, to ask if she was okay, I caught a glimpse of something strange. My mom lifted her hair up to reveal the back of her neck. Running along her back was a small zipper. I backed up, feeling somewhat disgusted at the sight. That wasn't part of any surgery she'd gotten in the past, and I'd never seen a scar like that before. It was an actual zipper, sewn into her skin. I slowly heard the zipper unzip, and a thud hit the tiled floor. Then, my mom stepped into the shower. I peeked into the crack of the door and saw the empty skin of my mother laying there. Whatever was in that shower was not my mom. I quietly went back into my room, locking the door behind me. How was I supposed to explain what I'd just seen? My mind raced through all different kinds of thoughts before there was a knock on my door.
Sweetie, are you hungry?
I stayed silent. Her voice got deeper.
I know you're in there.
I held in my breath before she stepped away. Her footsteps got more and more distant. I stepped out of the room, looking side to side. I needed to leave, now. I'd hire a new caretaker, but I couldn't take another minute here. All the lights were off in the house, so I used my phone flashlight to guide the way. As I walked downstairs, the smell of cookies filled my lungs. I peeked my head into the dining room to see my mother sitting there with a plate of cookies. On the table was a small box, wrapped up like a birthday gift. I wanted to walk away. I needed to get out of here, but I took a seat at the table, getting a good look at the unfamiliar mother in front of me for the last time. With a smile that used to light up a whole room, she slid the wrapped up box to me. I opened it. Inside, there was a tiny gray zipper. It was identical to the one that was sewn into her back. I looked back up at my mother, but she wasn't there anymore.